What do you think would be the thing to make that change over the next 10 years? Like what would make it work?
I hate to say it, but we need to change either by design or disaster. And it seems like disaster is the more likely option. Unfortunately, the more probable one, if we're talking in the futures language. But we can also design a way out of things. So I think we need to, with everything that's going on in the world, seek back to our local communities in a way. I also talk about, and and I can't remember who it was who said this, but being a citizen, it should be an active verb. It's something we are and part of who we are. And when we go out in society, democracy on a very local community basis, that we have agency in decisions, we have a role to play, and we should also take responsibility on ourselves to make it better for the collective, because then we all might even feel better, or generations from now, people might feel better because of what we did, right? So,
Welcome to Think Forward Show.
thank you.
Great to have you here, man.
Really good to be here, yeah.
Yeah, you're, I would call you it's like the 20 years becoming overnight success. It's like you've been doing this a long time, but like you've been hustling, and a lot of people in the space, your Anticipate organization is awesome. And I know your masterclasses have been really well received. But before we get into that, I want to hear about your story. I know you grew up in Bjornhoff. It's a tiny island, but why don't you take it from like where you started, where you came, kind of how you came into futures. And we want to talk about my favorite term, futures diplomat. So take it away.
That sounds good. Yeah, I love Holmes getting a shout out on your podcast, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. I've been following along for a while, and it's an honor to be part of that group of people I have on here. Yeah, so my story began on a tiny island in the Baltic Sea. It's not very known on a world stage, except for being where Nord Stream 2, gas pipeline blew up very close to. That was kind of 15 minutes of fame for a moment there, and then it's an energy island. So actually, actually there's a lot of considerations around the future in that regard and what it should be, and yeah. So I grew up with very safe childhood, risk averse parents in some ways, which is not really maybe related to what I'm doing now and being an entrepreneur and working with futures. I would say there's a bit of a risk part to that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very safe upbringing, and you kind of knew where things were, and there's a lot of trust in the society. I think for me, it was really like a place of comfort, and I didn't know much about the other parts of the world in that sense, except for what I could learn. But luckily, my parents, again, not working with public sector wages, they didn't have like an insane amount of money, very middle class upbringing in that sense. But we went on a road trip to the US every second year from when I was 11 to when I moved away from home. And that really shaped a lot of my world. And I got to see what else is out there. And I've been traveling a lot since, and really love to experience new cultures, being curious about what else is going on out there, right? And seeing how different people see not just, themselves, but as part of a collective as well.
Well, it's interesting, an island of one thing about, small places like that. Are there people that live on the island that never leave it? They've been there their whole life, and that's it for them?
For sure. Yeah. I think for most young people, actually, there's a rite of passage where you move away to take a university degree if that's your kind of career trajectory, because you can't do that. There's one high school on this island for 40,000 people. So you can probably tell it's not a big place in that way. So you kind of have to move to Copenhagen or to the other parts of Denmark at some point. And that's also what happened to me. I moved to Copenhagen now almost 15 years ago, together with my partner, which is also my current partner, my high school sweetheart, you might say. And we kind of, you kind of have to get that experience. And typically people move back. So there's kind of this, I think, island mentality that, you know what you came from in that sense, and it's a safe and kind of comforting, and then a more slow pace of life, I would say, in many positive ways.
Makes me think of America. We have the Amish, the Rumspringa, where the kids have a year to kind of either they're going to come back and join the church and do the Amish thing, or they're going to go out, and I think that they get excommunicated or something. It's kind of pretty harsh, but yeah, I mean, going out, and I think even just gap years, right, for kids and in any culture to kind of see other things. But you got a chance to see the road trips in the United States.
In terms of traveling the U.S. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
in Denmark, I love Danish people, and I just had a workshop today where we actually discussed like what are the really positive sides to Denmark, what should our vision be for the future in that sense between different business people, and we have these very grounding things to our culture in that sense that we have to look outside, we have to be open minded, we have a strong sense of trust. You have a from the beginning, right? It's a kind of the standard. Lose that trust over time, but in the beginning we're very trusting people in that sense. And I think one part that I really loved about the US is it's the land of dreams and opportunity. All these different stories that you've been told. The US have a massive cultural influence, and still to this day, I think, especially in Denmark, we have been close allies and partners with the US for many years. So we really look up to many of the things that are happening over there in your country. For
Yeah.
me, it was mind blowing to see these things in reality. Everything from Disney World to New York, where I dreamt about, working like everyone else, working and living and experiencing that really American lifestyle, the openness in the service culture. People are curious about where you're from, who you are, and
Hmm.
this like melting pot, like very used term, but I actually saw people from different parts of life. Like Denmark is a very homogeneous country, but Holland is even more of a homogeneous island. We're mostly Caucasian people here from the same kind of cultural
We
background.
got
So
everybody. We got it. We got everybody.
exactly. That was inspiring for me to see, like how people could live together peacefully and in somewhat homogeneous society. It wasn't maybe more so 20 years ago. Unfortunately, it seems like there's been a turn in a bad direction, but at least that was something that was inspiring for me to experience growing up.
Yeah, and it's interesting that a lot of the news will cover the bad spots of this of things here in the culture in the country. Overall, I mean, Americans are great. We all want the same thing. We want a great education, safety for our kids, good home, have fun with our friends, spend time with our families. We all want the same things. I think when you get to see that diversity, we do that with my son. We've traveled countries and other places, and it's important for him to grow up as a global citizen. He's an American. He'll eventually hopefully have a dual citizenship in Europe, but it'll give him, I hope, a perspective that I didn't have. And it's really great your parents had that foresight. Are they still on the island?
Yep, they're still based
Yep.
in Ireland, and eventually we also talking about moving back as everyone else. But being a futurist on a small island is not not ideal
Well, I was going
scenario
to
in that
say,
case.
now let's get to you voted yourself off the island in the survivor vernacular. You voted yourself off the island. I mean, I know you come back, but you got an internship with the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, which is world renowned. I mean, that's a heck of a way to kind of get into the space. So that journey, how did you kind of transition into finding this? Because you had a different, I would say, plan for your career, in terms of consulate work and kind of the diplomat. But you found that I find that this is one of the coolest angles to work in diplomacy because you're really talking about the future of like peace. Like, how do you make a better future, right? So how did this journey go and come from? Like, yeah, it's fascinating. I know it, but I want the audience to hear this. It's
No,
really
I think my worldview coming from Bornholm and trying to like find an educational path was difficult. I wanted to be an anthropologist at some point. That's a very high. I think you have to have a very high grades and then Danish context. Like one of the highest degrees, the more difficult ones to get into. So that was not really a possibility. I wanted to study history, but I also wanted to get a job. Sorry, historians out there, but that's kind of the reality. I had a very simple mind in that sense of what can it be. So I went to business school and studied language and culture and tried to learn Spanish and was an exchange in the Basque country in Spain and learned a lot from there as well. And that was a fascinating path, but in all honesty, I kind of tripped on innovation as my thing first. I failed a course in Spain. I had to take them all in Spanish. That was super difficult. Failed the course. I had to take
that's
an elective in Copenhagen,
tough.
and I just thought, now 3 years into my bachelor's degree, undergraduate, what do I actually want to do? And innovation, that kind of like sparked something in me, right? The newness, the things, like how do we combine things? And so I studied a degree in innovation entrepreneurship. No plans to become an entrepreneur whatsoever. That was never in my like my risk averse self and my upbringing to kind of step outside of that. How much in society and the ways of doing things that being an entrepreneur involves some risks, right? So I did that, and I kind of had this. I was still drawn to geopolitics as I've been growing up. So we also always watched the news. So while we ate dinner, of course, we talked about the day and stuff like this, but we tended to kind of follow what's been happening. My dad, he was an endless commentator on on everything politics, and that
Yeah.
was
Is
maybe
he
annoying
a
growing up.
policy? Is he a political? Is he a junkie, like news junkie, kind of?
Yeah, but he doesn't really realize it himself. So he's a retired
If
policeman.
he's
So he
listening now, he'll be like, "Yeah, you are, Dad. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not sure I'm gonna send it to him. Let's see. He's a retired policeman. He used to be an investigator,
Oh wow,
detective, and in Bornholm actually. Yeah. So no, but he always commented. I think it's been my like great grandfather. He was in the parliament. I never met him, unfortunately. I think it's kind of trickled down through our family
it's in
that's
your
something that
blood.
just goes very yeah.
It's definitely in your blood, man.
Yeah, in that sense. Yeah, so that's kind of at this moment, almost finishing my degree, trying to figure out what do I want to do next step. Always dreamt of going to the US for exchange or, that 1 year in high school. I have this very like simple, like everyone else, I think, growing up in Europe, like this idea of the American high school college life and what it is and what it isn't. And that was for a long time my inspiration. I think in high school, they even like we have this book that they send it out like yearbook that says, okay, what are you gonna become when you're like growing up and getting a career? And it said, oh, he's gonna be a businessman in the U.S. That was what people thought of me in high school. So, yeah. So I had this idea, yeah, why not like try to get into some consulates? So then Denmark as an open country, trading with many different places and being open-minded. We have this innovation centers. So I applied for some of those, tried to land internship. I thought about applying for the ones in the Spanish-speaking countries, but I also realized my limitations in that regard. But I've always been like really eager to be, study culture and trade and geopolitics and how do you actually navigate those very tough and sometimes very relational situations that are happening between different countries, like both innovation, but also in general with trade and commerce. So that was something I really wanted to do actually. And especially also because we went to visit Silicon Valley when I was in my master's degree. I was part of the group that kind of planned that trip and that brought even more inspiration, right? So I had my eyes set on that. That was gonna be my internship plan, and then further career in diplomacy. Yeah, they wouldn't have me. So I was approaching summer, and I was like, yeah, let me just look one last time to see if there's an internship that fits my interest. And there I came across something future studies internship. What does that mean? And I read the application form from SIFS, and it was my personality 1-to-1, like just me in a job posting. I don't think many people get to experience that during their lives.
That is, I'm telling you, man, in the futures world, you won the lottery because like
Yeah.
that, so many people, professional, try and get work roles like that. But I think also you were an internship. You started in a place that was more accessible, I think, but still, it's hard to get in there. And you evolved into being the head of partnerships. And I think for me, what, many of the listeners would want, because you know this organization, right? Like others, it's like, what did you learn? What do you think, in your opinion, kind of with some perspective now that you have your own firm, what did you think you learned there that was, you couldn't have learned anywhere else? Like what was the
Yeah.
things that you just was like, wow, like this is just a great place, which it is. Like, what's a great place?
Yeah, no, for sure. I also very much my identity merged with that place, right? It was my the first step in my career. I landed a full-time position as a consultant and was lucky enough to work there for some years and had some great colleagues. And then it's a great place to be in many ways, full of nerds, right? Curious people. And it's a rare place in the futures world in that sense that you actually have, I think they're around 30, right? But 30 people with the same kind of mindset in that way, but also very proactive in entrepreneurial spirit. So I love being there in many ways, and I think I'm super privileged to have had this experience. Right, fell into this field, and I can see also the interest that has increased in the futures and foresights field since that. This is something special to have. That I didn't have any formal training, but I managed to train through practice, which is what is the reverse of many people who are coming into this field. They want to, work on projects and do all these cool things that are part of the work, but it's not that easy because it's difficult to get that first experience, get your foot in the door, right? And I got that by chance in some ways. So I think that's really something I cherish a lot.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Many people, come into this space to kind of actually fall into it, or they see it and it's like, oh, you could do this as a job. But a lot of people do, myself included, kind of learn the field, passion for the work, but maybe in places that are not as receptive, the culture's not, but there's other ways to incorporate it, into like innovation or other ways you can bring it in. But you worked with a lot of organizations and you saw the gap, which will lead into talking about building the anticipate organization. Your master classes, I love it. You call them, they're very simple verbs: doing foresight, selling foresight. You kind of saw that kind of firsthand, right? What was the motivation to kind of, when leaving there, start anticipate? Was it just like you feel like you had a direction? Like, what was the thing that kind of motivated you to kind of take that? Because it's, a lot of us are entrepreneurs listening. It's a leap, right? It's been
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So 3 years ago, I knew I was going to leave the SIFs. I had some months to consider my time while still working there, and I started looking outside, and that's maybe something that's a bit of a what you're a bit blind to in an organization where you can sustain yourself and people are interested in working with you with, and that's just that I didn't feel the need besides for commercial activity to really expand my network and my horizon in that sense. So that's something I regret a lot that I didn't do before, because coming out of the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies and seeing what else is there lying in front of me in terms of the world of foresight was just astonishing. Yeah, I tried to like figure out, should I move back into innovation? That is a lot of big interest of mine. Jobs in the foresight field is not like they're not really something you can just get instantly, right?
No,
I was even
it's
open
not like a
to
design or a product management role.
yeah,
And I think that's why a lot of people take those roles and they bring their futures, skill set. Because it's a question of, is it a skill or is it a job? Well, it can be both, right? It's like, yeah, no, and your point is well taken, because a lot of people just, innovation is just, it's that couple year time frame. But the foresight lens, I think, is like a superpower if you can use it in innovation, because you have a different horizon look view, right? You can look differently at the flow of what needs to be in the pipeline and the
yeah.
portfolio, right? So
100%. And I think to a certain degree, Denmark is an innovation country. We're a country that had to innovate to really keep ourselves on top of the game, right? And that also speaks to our mindset. We're more about agility and innovative capability than the long-term view to things. It might seem that the culture is very receptive here as a national culture, but it's also difficult sometimes to include it in conversations because people have this also expectation that okay, we can always figure things out. So that's also something I brought into this kind of experiment, because that is what Anticipate started out as. It was not me knowing that I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. It still isn't in that sense. But I had kind of a drive and some ideas and some motivation to pursue building something from scratch. It was nerve-wracking at the beginning. I had a miserable first summer in the sense of like, what should I do with my life in that sense? And I just had
we've all been there, brother. We've all been there. We've
yeah,
all
I
been
had a
there.
friend telling me we were part of the same like little startup program that was offered. And I had a friend telling me it seemed like I was always very set in my ways that I wanted to do this, like from his perspective. And we've been knowing each other for now 3 years.
Mhm.
And I didn't feel that way. I was open to any opportunity that came along. I was even open to move abroad if that may be. I was looking at opportunities in London, in the US as well, to see if I had to take that step finally. But I started out and I enjoyed it so much. Like the freedom, that I could actually pursue the things that I found important within Foresight. Creating some impact, making it actionable, accessible. Some of these concepts that I felt had been missing. Sometimes I might be perceived as a bit critical of the field because I feel like we kind of we didn't really succeed in bringing it out further. So society is still people are still shocked that there's such a thing as future studies or foresight when you tell them, and
Why do you
and
think
many
that?
people. Yeah,
Why do you think that is?
yeah, I think it of course it comes from it having like the future is seen as not necessarily urgent in that sense, right? The way we've been framing it, that people expect it to be 5-10 years from now. I think we have to switch our mindsets. That's also why my company is called Anticipate, to the present perspective on the futures and how we can prepare and be anticipatory about potential futures out there. So the futures are a tool And for me, in many ways, it's not. I love science fiction movies. I love building scenarios and all these things, but it's only it's a big word in this sense, but it's mainly relevant for me when it becomes actionable in the present. Like, what does it do to us today? What does it do to our mindsets, our way of doing things, our decision making, and all these aspects that how do we integrate it into the organization? It shouldn't just be inspiration. So I still use the futurist term, and that's a whole nother discussion, because then people at least understand I work with the futures.
There's a protective nature because I don't want it to be diluted as a term. It's not like you can't be a futurist, but a lot of people, as Alex Fergnani will say, these charlatans, the fake futurists, it's like, it's one thing to be passionate about it. I kind of look at it as if your future's interested, your future's adjacent, or you're like really into doing the work, right? You and I both have a shared passion to democratize futures work, right? I think this decade is, especially with the chaotic uncertainty that has transpired since 2020 and just everything that's happening now as this is being recorded, the world is, becoming more chaotic and on fire, which you didn't probably think it could be, but hey, here we are. What's your take on it?
I understand the feeling of needing to be protective and protecting the rigor, as there are certain ways of doing things that are more thorough approaches to foresight and futures and all this. I think there's also kind of like a misunderstanding around that futures can be so many different things and different intentions with it. It doesn't have to be foresight's sake in that sense. I think we're kind of it's too early to talk about like the watering out or watering down the term of futures, because people still don't know futures even in their they don't have a futures in their life. So why are we started talking about this in our own community? I know it's an important discussion to have. It feels a bit hard when you see people, pop futurists out there, finger blazing, guns pointing in some direction, saying disruption 90 times in a keynote. But I don't mind as long as people understand what I do, because if I ask people in a room, it doesn't matter if it's a workshop room with top leaders or if it's a like public setting.
Is that word? Because that's almost like such a technical term. I said, "Do you know what a futurist is?" And they're like, "No."
Yeah.
I'm like, "I do long-term strategy," and that usually works at a cocktail party because they know, like, it's like longer than. I'm like, okay. They're like, okay, cool, because then I don't have to try and explain to your point. But like, what I love about and look, all the futurists in the world, we're trying to solve different problems. We come at it from different ways, which is wonderfully and robust and a beautiful part of this field. But for those who are in innovation, listening to this, that are just really interested in the space, there's a lot of frameworks, a lot of approaches, things that are, we'll call them de facto standards, right? Domain maps, things like that. But what I love what you've done is you've simplified it, right? You got this, like you call it ACT: anticipate, create, transform. And you're about actionable, and it's very simple. And it's not over engineered, which I really, really like. So talk about how that's serving you and how it helps be actionable for organizations. Because I think a lot of people will be curious to understand.
So I've been trained in a certain way of doing foresight that is very good from the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies. I trained other people in that way, like doing scenario planning, the Copenhagen method, as it was called at some points. What I failed to see was a bit of how it could be shifted depending on what outcome we're looking to have. But this is very much intended with a strategy in mind. We could test it or we can develop a new one. But coming from innovation, especially, I felt like we needed other methodologies to kind of be complementary and we can kind of change the lens depending on what kind of focus we have. So that's why it's built up this way. So I think in every single foresight or futures process, we need to anticipate. We need to understand what are the futures that could happen out there. As Sailin Tulla's concept of the futures triangle, with the weight of the past, the push of the present, and the pulls of the future. I think that's the bread and butter of doing foresight. We always need to do it. So the next step is create, and that's very purposefully kept open because what we need to create is different, and there's also an iterative phase. So Just because we have a strategy and we develop innovation concepts and prototypes doesn't mean that we should just like stay in that regard. We should test it back towards the anticipation we did in the first phase. I love the kind of when you can join those two different fields, because I think that's where it's most powerful. We need to kind of do as we go and create as we go. So it's kind of a framework that intends to contain both those elements in it. And then the final phase, and that's, if you read the white paper we published a couple years ago, actually, like Foresight framework white paper,
I did.
it's kept very open transformation, right? But fundamentally, that is the most critical phase. How do you do the change management work necessary to make sure what you have done in anticipation, what you do in the creation of a strategy or innovation concept or a vision? It doesn't just end there, that we have these great artifacts, but we should also have an idea of how it then like moves into the organization on a more continuous level. And I know you also speak a lot about futures ready organizations, right? So that's
Yes.
a lot of what the idea came from. Also, from my time as the head of partnerships at SIFS, that was the intention. We wanted to build a partnership model where the organization that we work with, they could like really get it into their like engine rooms and make it actionable in that sense.
It's interesting you talk about the organizations. I want to come back to that, because the things you saw when you were at Copenhagen, and even now, are you seeing like Foresight becoming more integrated, or is it like, I look at like Foresight as a project, right? It's like this: we do our scenarios thing at the beginning of the year, we all feel warm and fuzzy, or we do some, future sprint, just something, right? It's like, it's more the integration of this. Do you find, what do you find, like when you were at Copenhagen, are organizations, is there like a champion? Is someone trying to do it, or is it more like, what was the motivation for many people? Is it just to do a project with a particular pain point? Is it to try and build a Foresight capability? What do you see a lot? What did you see?
I think there's a difference between people who want to do Foresight because they're super curious about this and think, oh, it could potentially have value, or we've done it before, so it might be relevant. A big target audience for projects in general, that's people who just want to do Foresight. So as a consultant, you're basically selling the frameworks, methodologies, and the process, not necessarily the outcome, which is a weird situation to be in sometimes, to be honest. Other times they need a refresher or a new way of looking at strategy, right? So a new CEO came in and he or she wants to be seen as visionary, and they want to do like a different process where we really bring people together and create some buy-in on this. There are, I think, increasing number of organizations that are doing it on a more serious level. Partly also, I would argue, because of the work that's been done in the field of showing that this is not something that you have to contain to a process or a project. It can be done on a more continuous level. So you should have the in-house capabilities. It is not to say you should spend 100% of your budget, but at least some of your budget on having a bit of an eye towards the future. I know of organizations that even have multiple different teams with different time scales, time horizons. Also organizations where they're really trying to see how we can build as a capability. I think that's, I think, one major difference from when I started almost 10 years ago to now is the interest in capability building. We don't want to learn how to fish ourselves. We don't want to get served a fish necessarily. We want to learn the tools and the tricks and the methods so we can do it again on a repeated basis. Then comes, of course, the difficult part. How do we make sure we have a mandate, a reason for doing this in the organization at a continuous level? And that's sometimes also where a problem occurs, right? That the mandate, typically a person in that vouches for it and top management, they leave the organization or they decide against it, or a budget happens. I know, for example, in a Fortune 1 company where they had a Foresight department, and then, priorities changed. And then all of a sudden this company that of all should have the capacity to do Foresight, it was kind of made redundant. And I think that's a great shame, because from what I'm hearing, they did great work there. So yeah, I'm seeing it from kind of different lenses that are kind of at play. It's not an easy fix to solve, right? As all change processes are in that way.
Well, and you've created and anticipate these masterclasses, and there's a lot of masterclass stuff out there. And for those listening, I really encourage you to, I'm going to put some links in the notes. You should check these out, because I found it interesting when you kind of came out with this at first. And I actually, I can always, I say it, I signed up for it too. I paid for it. I wanted to see how you were approaching this, because your first one was about selling Foresight. And you're like, wait, am I going to be a sales dude, like a biz dev? Like, no, it's about making the case. It's about the business case, because you really have to find the champions, right? It's like everyone always kind of starts with learning the methods and like what it is about. But in the, when it comes down to it, you have to be able to actually make this happen. You have to get people to commit to it, to financially support it. Sometimes you have to bring a person like yourself in or myself to facilitate this. I found that really cool. And, you know, you have other things like doing for they're all action verbs. I think is really nicely ties into quite a little library. I mean, why did you start there? I'm trying to put words
I
in your
must
mouth.
give,
I mean, that's kind of like my take. I was like, that's pretty brilliant. So
yeah,
yeah,
I appreciate it. Thank you. And actually, I have to give credit to our futures colleague, Chloe
yeah,
Duvall, who kind of came to me with the idea actually in the beginning. We met in at the Dubai Future Forum in, was it 2024? Because of a common friend, and we just clicked, and we had a couple of meetings, and then all of a sudden in the beginning of last summer, she was like, "Oh, why don't we like do something together? What about these masterclasses?" I love, proactive and inspirational energy a lot. I also see a lot of people, and I have a hard criticism on this, that people fail to commit to something. So I'm always a bit wary of it. What can we do that has relatively low, uh, low time resources spent on something where we don't exactly know whether we will do this together at the end of the day? Or I don't like to build up like a huge project together for the first time, and then all of a sudden you don't hear from the person again. I experienced that a couple of times, so it's not fun. The thing with Chloe was that she was actually super engaged and follow up, and we have complementary skill sets. So she comes a bit more from a cultural foresight, trend forecasting lens, and have a lot of experience there, and more experience than me even in the field. I come from more of like a strategic foresight perspective. So I think we found a good match there, and then we thought, okay, why let's make an experiment out of this. What do people actually want to hear about? Because we felt we could talk on different things. So actually, the first thing we did was set up a poll. We didn't have anything prepared, but we just set up a poll. What would you like to hear about? Selling foresight, doing foresight. And I think the last one was like basics of foresight. And it was kind of similar in terms of what it rated and how many people polled. And there seemed like there
mhm,
was some interest for it, right? And the idea with the masterclasses was that a lot of futures learning opportunities are expensive. It's
yeah,
difficult. There's a high, talk about gatekeeping. It's difficult to access for most people. Of course, there are many great self-paced learning offerings out there. I'm building one myself with anticipating futures course. So we've come out hopefully this year. A lot of things have happened that has kind of pushed it, but yeah, but there are a lot of different offerings out there, but not really accessible ones. So which we try to see if there's any interest, and for now, like I think 150 people signed up before the masterclass itself. Half of the people joined, and since I think we sold 50, 100 or more of replays. So it's been a great success, and it really gave us like some appetite for seeing more of like, oh, there seems like there's so much interest in this. Let's kind of build on that and see if we can make a whole package. And we're planning to do a fourth masterclass later this spring as well on
well,
cultural fights of foresight, right?
it's accessible. I mean, it's
Yeah.
$75 US dollars. Most people can afford it. It's 40. If you can't even make it, you can, I thought was really brilliant is like, you want the recording, you want to just watch it, it's $40. I mean, that's accessible for anybody. And I think when you get that, you get a couple hundred people, it's like, it pays for itself. And it's something that is like you said, like some of the other big places, you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars and it's a lot of time. And I just don't have that. And I think it's when the skill set comes, people need to learn it, incrementally. But it makes me think about the lot of those people that are on are probably, well, the lone futurist, the one in the wilderness, the evangelist, and they're trying to build something. I think the one thing that I've seen, I want to get your take on this, is when people leave and the capability evaporates. It's like, how do we make this stick in a culture? Like, have you seen any things that work? Like, I'm just curious because it kind of revolves around this, like education and spreading that word, right? Getting people educated about it.
I think that's besides the mandate part of whether you have mandate to do this, this is the biggest problem whatsoever, right? It's like, and I've saw this a lot, especially as a head of partnerships, because we had 45 different partner organizations. Not all of them are interested in integrating Foresight in the way that we thought that would be good for them. But a lot of these people out there were lone wolves, as you say, like whatever you might call them, like small teams that really were trying to like claim a territory that was difficult to get into. And the first thing I always said was like find allies. Like that's number one priority. You can't keep this to yourself. I know it's tempting because it's also a political situation internally in the organization. You want to be the futurist or the futures person, but you need to find allies. You need to find those people across all different departments that will support your mission. Meet up for brown bag lunches, for signal scanning workshops, get some interest, do some capability building. It doesn't have to be only in your department. And then, of course, also look up to whoever is paying for this, right? And make sure that their needs are met as well, because that's sometimes also at fault. It's that the lone wolves get so busy serving the rest of the organization, then that the budget it comes from a department that doesn't get any use of it, right? So it's kind of that divided focus in a sense. And I have seen some great examples. For example, a big Swedish retail company where this was very much an experiment. And what it did was really turn a process into more of like a capability building initiative. So, building like kind of like a trends framework, taking different kind of engagements, different activities into different departments, depending on who the audience was. So whether it was like the legal staff or whether it was designers, you need to talk to people in a different way to make futures interesting and relevant for them, right? Communication, I think that's something I want to mention. Communication is critical here. We're talking about something that's complex for people already from the beginning when you say futures. It's you're opening up a whole box of things that they can't contain in their heads. So we have to talking about something very complex here. So you need to make it accessible in a certain way and communicate with the receiver in mind. That's what people also need to do on the insides of companies. Communication, communication, communication. And then, of course, build slowly, find allies, build some momentum for this, do some cool projects that people want to be part of. And then I think the rest will follow in many ways. But it's always the ups and downs. And of course, I haven't been employed in that position. I've only been able to support from the outside. But I think there's so much potential if we really could get this into organizations in a proper way.
I would love to do. This is a great kind of transition into kind of like, let's zoom out, right? I'm for those listening on the audio, my hands are going animation, going, big worldview, kind of like huge kind of perspective. Cause like we've been talking a lot about organizational stuff. So the organizational nerds on here, but if you're just joining from a timestamp, let's talk about kind of this, where we go from here, but also a perspective. Like we're both into geopolitics and macro history. Right. The formation, the nation state, like you're in we both have intersections. We both find it fascinating. Right. Obviously most futures kind of look at this. They talk about 5 to 10 years. Right. But when you think of this kind of the arc of history, and if I think every good futurist is a student of history. I think they look at cycles, they look at patterns, but they also understand, what motivates people at certain times. Wars for resources, the last 1,000 years, all of these ages, as I like to call them, everything's been dependent on human energy, human labor, right? We're moving to a different place where we've got machines, things are going to be smarter than us, robotics. I mean, it's going to change so much. Where we are in this kind of moment in time, what do you think history teaches us as futurists, like about like when we're in this, where we are? I know it's like, yeah, easy question, but hey, it's fun.
It's a great question, and I think there's so much to say about this topic, and I know you've written extensively on this, and I think there's a lot to learn from that as well. And I think fundamentally what I find interesting about futures is people. I mean, I'm very simple like that, right?
Yeah.
And we are people, and we tend to forget that there's been people before us that's been through crisis that seemed unsurmountable in a sense, like just like we are now. And we tend to repeat the same patterns over and over in some ways, but there's always something that changes over time. And that's something we shouldn't get too locked in on history, but still learn from what has been going on. And I think we have I don't think our we're not really up to the task of getting a history into our society and learning from that in a proper way. So how can we even get to the future as something we can learn from? I think that's kind of those two things fit together. If you also look at like the modern versions of the futures cone, in that sense that we come from many different paths, and we're in different presents, and then we're looking into different futures. There's so much to talk about there. And I think one example, and I think when I was talking with you in the beginning, we just had a little discussion before this. I was reading a book on migration throughout
I was
times,
going to
and
bring that up.
I
Yes.
think that was a fascinating like look into how we always been moving around. We tend to forget sometimes that we've been going all over the place for centuries on end, for tens of thousands of years. And it's really shaped us a lot in our ways of viewing the world, our cultures. It's not that culture is a static thing that we can just expect to like, continue react as if it is sometimes, but we keep being shaped, and we should also accept that there are some things that will change. I think that's what people have a hard time with, right? That's sometimes where history can be comforting to say, okay, we have been through things before that changed us, but in a positive way. We're in many ways better off. We have been moving around. We have pursued new opportunities. There has been, of course, a lot of tragedies throughout history, but also like groundbreaking new inventions that changed the life for the better in most parts of the world, or even in smaller settings. Um, I think there's a lot to learn, that things are not as either good or bad or dark or gloomy as we tend to see things, as we have a I don't know, a tendency to do. I don't know if it's just the human mindset that's very risk averse, and looking at these things like, oh yeah, we're gonna see the end of the world soon, and I experienced that a lot. But we also have hope, and hope is a very powerful force for doing good and changing things for the better. So that was a little bit of a rant, I guess. But I think this is so interesting that we should really like try to understand where we come from as
Yeah, I
humans.
agree. I agree. I think we're in a transition period. Obviously, you look at like Strauss and Howe, you look at Conjunctive Way, you look at any kind of like cycles pattern, even bigger ones like Toynbee or Spengler's macro, kind of the macro history of civilizational change. It's all kind of converging, and we are in a crisis period. I do think we'll emerge from it. I think right now people don't. They're seeing just you know and think about it, right? Anybody's 25 years old, grew up after 9/11, right? They know nothing but just kind of like the churn, the chaos. And it's hard to kind of convince that. But in the longer lens, the wider view of it, it's going to be a different world 5 years from now, probably a multipolar world. One of the things I've always said, like, you and I want to do a master class. We should teach one on game theory. I don't think enough futurists use game theory in the probable outcomes. Because this is one of the things I use a lot and in my work is understanding those choices, or the everyone makes the different choices instead of the obvious choice. And I think that on a global scale leaves a lot of, uncertainty, and there'll always be uncertainty to some degree. But I think we're okay. I think you did a session, you talked about, hope for a greener future, right? I mean, was that your,
Yeah, that was the name of a session I did. Recently.
yeah. Well, it's like,
One to prepare
it's
for.
about having hope, right? I think of Nick Badbitten, who talks about being a hope engineer, right? Hope rather than doom. You know, why do you think that kind of framing is important? Like, how do you maintain that when everyone's kind of like, no, man, no, it's not going to happen.
I think we shouldn't also, and that's also contrary to what I learned a lot in my early days as the future is the foresight practitioner, was that we shouldn't underestimate the framings that we have on the future. We have, of course, we can't be non-normative in our approaches to doing foresight. Unfortunately, like we can't be fully objective because we bring with us some baggage in good and bad. And I think that's something I've learned over time, is that we also need to the right frame for the right situation in that way. And this was, of course, I tend to see myself both as as idealistic in some ways that I really want to democratize futures, whatever is the cost is going to be in some ways. But I also am pragmatic that, it needs to fit the purpose of what we're doing. And I think right now what we need is to look at things in a more hopeful framing. I think pessimism and, can lead to, a realization that something is wrong, but also an apathetic state where we don't do anything, right? It's like,
Yeah, the
we need to.
the black pilled futurist, like that's, please don't anybody get that .com domain. But yeah, no, it's always like,
It's coming up.
Look, I mean, I'm connected a lot with the survivalist community, and look, I love the show Alone. Like, it's a fascinating study in human social behavior, but like, the belief of like the preparedness community, it's like, there's a lot of catastrophists, like they want the world to burn. I don't want the world to burn. I like the world. One of the things that's been a large topic this last year and a lot of conversations on the show and I've had is around artificial intelligence, and not in the sense of artificial like intelligence as it's going to make the world magical and solve all of our problems. But I'm looking at it, what it's doing to kind of power foresight in good ways. And some ways it's kind of like making me concerned about what I call safe futures. It's not really pushing the limit, provocation. It's like, when you are teaching like a master class and you're talking to clients, are you using this? Are you seeing the use of this in a way that's positive and maybe some cautionary tales of in terms of democratizing futures?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is such a big potential disruption in good and bad. And again, I always talk about good and bad. And of course, that's also with my kind of subjective opinion of it. But when we, for example, did the Augmenting Foresight Masterclass, I had many second thoughts on AI in that way of what people expected from that masterclass and what they then got was, I think, in some ways different. I was not going to our plan was not to share exactly how you can shortcut a foresight process, because the core to foresight is that you bring people along on the journey. Like, you can make the most beautiful scenario report at the end of the day and say, here you go, and no one reads it and no one is impacted by it, so it has no value in essence, right? It's a great story, but once no one cares. So you need to bring people with you on the journey, and we can't shortcut that part, and that's why I also care a lot about facilitation and the human side of futuring in that way. I think, of course, we can make things in certain ways quicker, easier come together. I read something about someone who was trying to do like a collective signal scanning exercise, and there was some pre-work to that exercise.
Yes.
And it was asked people to bring some signals to the workshop. And from what you could see, it was just her framing of it that people put into ChatGPT and then had to produce series of signals. And I think that's really where I can see AI not being very useful at the moment. For example, that thought provocation, I tend to call it beige futures or like gray futures in that sense. The 50 shades of gray, that is all the variations of the same, and it will keep becoming that more and more if we keep producing things, right? Because it learns from its own behavior. And AI and generative AI is learning from itself at the moment, right? It's something that's kind of replicating its own behavior in some ways. So I think there are some warning signs. I think it can help and make it more accessible in many ways. If all of a sudden we can do something that took a big budget before, doing scenarios, we can make it in a more lightweight, like streamlined version that can help more organizations think about the future. But we need to be careful with what we replace and process, I think, along the way.
What I would love to kind of, as we kind of getting toward the close of the show, is kind of get some more rapid, punchy kind of questions here. So I think one of the things your journey's been so interesting is you're also young. You're young in this space, but you've got a lot of experience, which, is a rare thing. And for someone's kind of wanting to do this work, like, what do you tell them where to start? I mean, like, if you're going back to yourself, like, what would you give advice? There's a lot of people, like you said, it's not as easy to get into the space sometimes.
And I get that question a lot, and that's also why I built some
I'm sure
resources on my website, right? I've been trying to help people a little bit. It's difficult. I think the most difficult thing to acknowledge is that you probably need some experience that you're not going to get paid for. And that's very, very difficult because there are so many people who think they stumble upon foresight or futures, and they're like, whoa, this is exciting. Like, this is the best thing in the world. Like, I also think, and you think, right? And then they get kind of apathetic when they then experience, oh, not everyone thinks this way. It's actually something that's very hard to bring into reality that we want to do this. So go out there and get some experience and like host formats where you're really trying to get better at facilitating these things. And also, as you said previously, try to see how it can fit into your role, what you're doing already. Not everyone can live off foresight is quite difficult. We're not that not that many people in the world, and it's also taken a while for me in the sense of building something that was sustainable enough, right? But I think get some experience, go out there, read, of course, but don't read too much. Maybe even find your Bible. My Bible in that sense was Out of the Long View by Peter Schwartz, a classic book. We talked about Toffler, and there are many imaginable. That's the book that's been recommended to me the most. Jane McGonigal's Imaginable. I still have to read it, and I feel bad. And many people who are new to the field have said that kind of blew their minds. So go out and find a Bible and get started that way. And I think it's fun, like it's exciting. So there's plenty of motivation to get going.
So let's kind of turn it inward, like for you, well, more of the view. Is there any, what's like one signal or weak thing that you're seeing out there, while you're kind of tracking right now, you think most people are just like missing?
And it's a really difficult question because I think there are quite a few, and I think something around how our language changes over time. I notice my language has changed with the use of AI. That actually it's kind of morphing together. I also noticed the language of the younger generations and how they're using language. I think there's so much complexity to language that we need to understand better, because that's really where communication for me is critical. I didn't study communication anyway, but I just know between the humans and people, it's just a difficult thing to do. But if we do it right, we can really move things, move the needle. So I think it's kind of not highlighted enough how much our language matters in certain ways. Not to say that we should always necessarily use the right terms. This is a completely correct academic term for anything. I think that can sometimes be limiting, but finding out like how do we kind of strike the right balance between that being absolutely correct and meeting people where they are, because that's the easiest way to distance people is to make things too complicated, confusing language. As you say, long-term strategy, that's easier to understand, right, than we're talking about these difficult things. So I think that's maybe more of a meta signal in the end. That's in that way. But I think it is super interesting. And another one is the kind of the failure to commit to things in society on a bigger scale. We have become individualized in many parts of the world, and that has led to some consequences that might have further consequences down the line. In that sense of like the what's in it for me mentality for me is a bit scary. Of course, we need to keep that in mind to protect ourselves and what we prioritize, but also we're playing on too many horses at the same time sometimes. So like we can't get anything done if we don't try to be empathetic to other people and try to understand where they're coming from, find some sort of consensus, even though it can be difficult. You need to go out and disagree with people to reach a better point in time. So like the whole collaboration culture, commitment, I think that's also something I'm a bit worried about at the moment of how things are, and also in the next 5-10 years. Hopefully there will be something that kind of sparks a change in this way.
What do you think would be the thing to make that change over the next 10 years? Like what would make it work?
I hate to say it, but we need to change either by design or disaster. And it seems like disaster is the more likely option. Unfortunately, the more probable one if we're talking the future's language. But we can also design our way out of things. So I think we need to, with everything that's going on in the world, seek back to our local communities in a way. I also talk about, and and I can't remember who it was who said this, but being a citizen, it should be an active verb. It's something we are and part of who we are. And when we go out in society, democracy on a very local community basis, that we have agency in decisions, we have a role to play, and we should also take responsibility on ourselves to make it better for the collective, because then we all might even feel better, or generations from now, people might feel better because of what we did, right? So yeah, I hope those are very high words in that sense, but I think it needs to start from the bottom up in many ways. It seems like we're playing a not the best game on the geopolitical level at the moment. Unfortunately, there's so much happening. So return to local engagement.
I love that. I mean, that's a great way to wrap. It's we need to go local. Conversation I had yesterday was a similar, about you can't make the change on you can really affect is, used to be the bumper sticker, think globally, act locally, right? It's like it's the same thing. That's a great way to kind of wrap this conversation up. I just wanted to say thank you for just your time, but just a kind of great view into, a wonderful beginning, career that you've got so much ahead and you're doing great work. And just glad people can, and if people want to find you, obviously, as we, and I'll have in the notes, what's the best way to, get in touch and get to know you, follow your work?
LinkedIn, I think, is where I'm most active. Maybe too active, some would argue. Otherwise, anticipatefutures.com. Anticipate.com is taken, unfortunately, by some domain sharks. I'm very annoyed. I'm gonna if I had someday, but anticipatefutures.com.
Let me guess, you're trying to sell it for $500,000.
I haven't tried yet. I don't dare. But it seems like they're pro domain sharks. But yeah. So until then, and otherwise it's hi at anticipate.dk. .dk is a Danish domain. So, and also in terms of what you just said, I'm still learning a lot. Like I'm still learning this. I must say I really appreciate how many people have taken the time throughout the last few years where I've been trying to open up and see what else out there, and they have really been a huge influence on me. I've met so many amazing people on conferences, online, and virtual coffee meetings, and that's really changed my worldview for the much better in the community and outside. So I really want to appreciate that, and I hope to pay it forward to some people as well. That's something I want to prioritize as things might get busier for me with Anticipate, but still prioritizing that part. So I also appreciate the chance to speak about these things on your podcast, Steve. That's amazing.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. We'll see you probably for round 2 at some point. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.